Grace and peace be with you on this day. The Christmas story is one that you heard on Christmas Eve here, and you've been hearing it for a good portion of your life, and in the last few Sundays. Is a story that, historically speaking, was meant to be a theological punch in the nose to the Roman Empire and to the dominant religion of the day, the Jewish temple. The Christmas story is one that was developed afterwards, in hindsight, after Jesus lived and preached and taught and performed his miracles and was among us for some time, and then in hindsight, the Christmas story was developed. And there's this theory that it had to do with the understanding of God among us, Emmanuel, but in reality, it was more of a rebellious statement, as I said before, a punch in the nose to the dominant powers. For you see, back in those days, back in the first century, the Roman Empire had all the Roman gods, and they were all muscular and long-haired, and they kind of looked like Brad Pitt in that movie where he played the part of a Greek god. And all the understanding of a god was this full-grown, armored man. The Jewish temple, as well, in the Jewish tradition, they were praying for the Messiah. But they thought that the Messiah would be also a full-grown man. They thought the Messiah would be a warrior, a sword-wielding warrior. And so, when God among us, Emmanuel, when the Messiah is presented as a newborn child, the understanding was that, that's not the norm. That was not likely. So it was really a rebellious statement saying, our God is not an emperor. Our God is not a warrior. Our God, as unlikely as you might think it is a newborn child, has come in the form of a babe. And if you think about how vulnerable a child is, and that God would enter that state of vulnerability in order to save us, really went against the conventional wisdom not only of its day, but also of many people today. Because today we still have the sense that, that we need to be strong, that we need to lift weights, that we need to have a lot of armors, we need to have a strong military, we need to wield a sword, we need to own guns, that we need to be as strong as we can be. But the message of the Christmas story is paradoxical, and that is that we need to be as vulnerable. And through that vulnerability, we will experience God. The Christmas story, as unlikely as it was thought back in the first century, today, a good 20 centuries later, is still considered to be unlikely. And I have come across in my ministry many people who consider the Christmas story to be highly unlikely. And they give me their academic arguments. And I listen to the academic arguments, and for the most part, I sit there and I agree. For the most part, I agree. They have arguments that are irrefutable. And they talk about the Christmas story being a myth as part of our Christian traditions. And for the most part, I don't try to change their mind. But what I do tell them is, what I'm going to offer to you now, is that argument is irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant. All that academic talk, as much as I may agree with it, as a scholar who has a doctorate, does not disprove the presence of God, does not completely eliminate the ability of God being among us and within us and moving through us. That the Spirit of God is still very real today, whether or not you have an academic argument for the Christmas story being true or not. And so we could take a look at the facts. And the facts are that in the year 33, 35 of the Common Era, something happened. Something magnificent happened. And it changed the lives of people. It changed the lives of an entire community. It created a whole new movement, and that movement eventually changed the world. And then once it changed, they started to look back, and they wrote the Christmas story as an effort to explain this new paradigm, to explain how this is something that is God-given. It is divine. And that it has the ability to bring us closer to God. And that this new paradigm is one that is to heal us from the inside out. For you see, the power of the Christmas story transcends the veracity of its narrative. The power of the Christmas story is that, however unlikely you find it to be, God roams through the unlikely. God is part of the unlikely. I'd like to offer you a story, one that actually is part of our modern day background, for we hear this in the news all the time, and actually just a little while ago we prayed for it. This is a story of twins born into an African-American family sometime in the early 70s, and these twins lived in a northern city that had lots of violence. And these twins had everything that you would expect that twins do. All the stereotypes of twins applied. They loved to dress alike. And these twin girls, they were girls, were always playing games with everybody else, trying to see who could guess their names and so forth. They could finish each other's sentences. They had that kind of twin connection where they kind of knew what the other one was thinking. These twin girls were always together, always doing everything in harmony with each other. And you couldn't say one without the other. You couldn't see one without the other. And around the age of 10 or 11 or so, one Christmas morning, they went outside to play with their Christmas toys that they received that day. And as life would have it, there was a gang shooting nearby, and a stray bullet found one of the girls. And that girl was hit in the head, in the back of the head specifically, and the bullet went out through the front, and she died immediately. So you can imagine the grief of her twin sister, who considered her sister her soul sister. That's how they referred to each other. They referred to each other as soul sisters. You can imagine the grief of the family. You can imagine how Christmas was ruined by a stray bullet, not just on that fateful day, but for years to come. So I'm going to fast forward, years pass, and the surviving twin becomes a full-grown woman, and she falls in love, and then she gets married, and then in time she has a child. She, becomes pregnant. While she's pregnant, in her 9th month of pregnancy, it's the Christmas season, it's Advent, it's that time of year. She has a dream, and she wakes up from her dream panic-stricken, completely panic-stricken, fully convinced that the child that's in her womb is in danger, that child is not going to survive the birthing process. So she wakes up her husband, and they run to the emergency room, and at the emergency room, the doctors make their test, and they tell her, you're fine. The baby's fine. You have nothing to worry about. Go back home. Well, she insists that something is wrong. And they insist that something is not, that everything's okay. And they ask her, what is your argument? How can you argue with our medical findings? And she does not want to tell them about her premonition. She does not want to tell them about her dream and that she woke up from its panic-stricken. All she says is that, I just know that something is wrong. So her husband and her family support her, and they insist that something be done. And so OBGYN doctor comes in and says, well, you are in your 9th month. You could wait a few more weeks, but we'll go ahead and we'll do a C-section if you like. And they agree. They do a cesarean, and the child is delivered on Christmas Day, on Christmas morning. A baby girl. And the mother is just delighted. The OBGYN doctor comes up to her and says, it seems that the umbilical cord would have been a problem, but there's really no need. We really can't confirm that. But nonetheless, here is your child, safe and sound. Within an hour, they're examining the child, and they realize that she's got 2 birthmarks. The newborn babe has one birthmark in the back of her head, another one in the front. Coincidence? That family thinks not. Now, the cynic, the person who's an unbeliever, thinks that it's just a nice story. It's just a nice story. It's just, it's got a pretty ending. It's just a nice story. It doesn't really prove anything. But for that family, it is not a nice story. It was the gospel truth. They see it as God intervening in their life. I had the pleasure of hearing that story firsthand from an aunt of the young girl born with the 2 birthmarks. By the time I'd heard the story and I met the young girl, she was actually a teenager. And she was telling the story to a group of people, and everybody was saying, let me go see the birthmarks, and they were parting her hair, and I felt so bad for the poor teenage girl. Everybody's just picking at her hair, like, like if she had lice or something. They all wanted to see the birthmarks. And some people can say, yes, I see the birthmarks, and I didn't go there. I just took it as truth. Because whether or not she has the birthmarks, whether or not it's true, whether or not, it's actually irrelevant. What matters is that it's true to them, and that they see it as God in their life, and that in their home, Christmas was restored. In their lives, they can now rejoice once again. So whether or not you believe in the supernatural connection of twins, whether or not birthmarks can mean something, it's how they interpret it that matters. Now, the obvious inference to be made here, there's an obvious connection of the dots. It's that people are thirsty for God. People just have this hunger for God in their lives. People hunger for the Christmas story. They hunger for it now more than ever. And if you think about it, if you think about our year, the year 2015, it's been a very full year. I mean, a lot has happened in 2015. And if you're a news junkie the way I am, boy, is there a lot to go through as we evaluate the year 2015. All kinds of things happened in the year 2015. Some very good things happened. We had in the summer of 2015 a very, very powerful summer. Marriage Equality Act was passed, and people of all orientations can get married, and all sorts of good news were spread. And it seemed that, socially speaking, the United States of America was moving forward in a way that was unprecedented from years past. But then, not much later, we kind of took a step back, and Islamophobia crept in. Terrorism managed to instill fear into the hearts of most Americans. And fear, almost like a Greek tragedy, became personified. Fear had a voice at the table, at the political discourse. Fear was being promoted. You can't really argue against it. The people who are in fear for their lives have a rightful argument for it. Consider if you were in San Bernardino just a few weeks ago, and those acts of terrorism happened. The thing about fear is that it could spread. It could spread like a virus. And before you know it, it's affecting the way we think. Nobody is immune of fear. Every single person, myself included, members of this church included, could fall to fear. And you could find yourself saying things and doing things that you normally would not have done or said prior to the fear. Fear could have a power over a human being and completely overpower their sense of rationality. And before you know it, they are following in steps that might lead to violence. The thing is that the Christmas story is about transcending fear. The Christmas story, the lighting of the candles, the gifts under the tree, all of it is more than just metaphor. It's about us moving forward as Christians and being solid in our faith. And when we hit a fearful moment, when fear is in our lives, we go back to these messages that have been given to us throughout all our lives, that are even in the hymns that we sung not too long ago, and have them take us back to a place of faith where we know that yes, there is pain, yes, there's suffering, yes, there's violence, yes, there's persecution, yes, there's something terribly wrong, but I'm not going to succumb to it. And yes, we've had a year full of bad and difficult moments, full of bad and difficult memories, but we've also had a year of beauty. We've had a year full of beauty, some of it in our own personal lives. Consider the many births that were in the families. Consider the many people that were able to enjoy another day in creation. Consider all the good things that happened, not just at an individual level, but also on a collective level. I've got for you one more story. This is a story of beauty around us, overcoming fear. San Bernardino, you may have seen this in the news or maybe in YouTube. You might be familiar with this narrative, but it won't hurt to hear it again. The virus in San Bernardino actually overcame all of Southern California for some time, and in the days that followed, people were on edge. A Muslim family in full Muslim garb, was at a shopping mall in Southern California. And the people being on edge didn't like it. And so a few people came forward and started to express their negative views towards the Muslim family. And that gave other people the permission to also express more negative views to the Muslim family. Before you know it, that Muslim family was being accosted by insults and offensive slurs because of their religion and because of their attire. They tried to leave. They tried to escape. But before you know it, they were cornered. And they were cornered in such a way that they could just stand still and not move. And that small but powerful mob was there, and they were becoming emboldened. They were becoming more and more emboldened by each other. Now you figure that the most likely hero to step forward would be a security person of the shopping mall, or a policeman, or a law enforcement individual of some sort. But for some reason or the other, they were not around. For some reason or other, they were in other portions of the shopping mall. And this moment was happening, and the Muslim family had no recourse until a young teenager, more or less around the same age that Jesus was when Jesus went into the temple, stepped forward and broke through the mob and stood next to the Muslim family. Now this teenager was of Anglo descent, blonde and blue-eyed, looking very, very American, and not Middle Eastern. Did not have to say a word, just stood there in silence and held hands with the Muslims. That gave permission to her parents to break through, and her parents followed the teenager and stood side by side with the teenager. And then that gave permission to other people who wanted to help out as well. And before you knew it, an entire group of people were standing with the Muslims, supporting them, making them feel safe, and shaming the persecutors. From a child. It took a child to come forth for the adults to have the courage to do what was right. Highly unlikely, wouldn't you say? But God deals with the unlikely. God deals with that which you least expect. And so it is in this time of year that we put the children up here and we have a children's moment with them and everything, but they have a lot to teach us. And we have a lot to learn from them. And we have many of our own faults and limitations to shed before we pass them down to them. This Christmas season, I want you to consider the highly unlikely. And that is God is in your life. That God is among us. Consider, as unlikely as it might be, that God is using each and every one of us to do God's work. That your hands, that your feet, that your voice, that your very existence is an instrument of God to help promote peace, love, and justice to a community that is so hungry and thirsty for it. Amen. Amen.